Hello and welcome to this video tutorial for Paramics Discovery 25. This is the last in our series, it's the 17th, as we've covered various different features within Paramics Discovery 25 over the last 6 months or so. If you haven't seen the other ones, please check them out. I hope you're going to enjoy this one. It's a really great feature as we look at the improvements we've made to hazard overrides within Paramics Discovery. I'm going to be using this model in front of me to demonstrate the hazard override improvements within Paramics Discovery 25. And as you can see from this model, it's quite a complex junction that we've got here. So it's effectively a roundabout, but we've also got this road going through it. Sometimes these were called hamburger junctions. And we've also got multiple lanes on the roundabout. So here we've got 4 lanes in some of the sections, and we've also got multiple lanes on some of the approaches. So quite a complex junction. Now, because this isn't a standard roundabout, we haven't used our roundabout lanes editor to code this type of roundabout, but we've just coded it using normal nodes and built the network up by adding in the links individually and setting them as curved and adding in the correct number of lanes and so on. So when it comes to getting the lane use right, hazard overrides is a really key feature to make this junction operate successfully. Now, if you haven't come across hazard overrides before, I would encourage you to take a look at a couple of things before we even look at the improvements within this video. And we can actually do this now through the help menu. If I go to help and search the knowledge base, I introduced this in video tutorial 15. This is another new feature within Paramics Discovery 25. And if I type in here hazard overrides, it will search the Paramics Support Center, and I can see articles and information about hazard overrides and hazards in general within here. So there's quite a lot of different things you can go to with hazards, but I draw your attention to this article called Hazard Overrides. And this was written a while ago. It was applicable in S-Paramics before Paramics Discovery, but it's still relevant today. So have a look at this article called Hazard Overrides to understand exactly what it is that they do. The other place that you can go is to, again, search on our knowledge base article, this time for lane choice. That should do it. And I'm looking for a workshop video which we produced a few years ago. This is it here, session 4, vehicle behavior and lane choice. And this is a 25-minute video which we did in 2020, and it goes through various aspects of coding to do with how vehicles behave on approach to junctions and how they choose lanes. And that's very intertwined with how hazards work and also how hazard overrides work. Okay, so let's go back to the junction here. Now, if I open up my styles panel, first of all, one thing that you will notice is a new option in there called hazard overrides. We've also got our standard option, hazards and signposts. I'll toggle on hazards and signposts first. This isn't new, this has been in Paramics Discovery for a while. And this highlights points in the network where a hazard is created that's going to have effect on how vehicles choose their lanes in the network. So we can see different types of hazards. So this is a near side turn with turn lanes because we can see it splits in 2 different directions. We've got a widen and signals hazard here because we can see it goes from 3 lanes to 4, and we've also got a signal junction there. And we've got other types of hazards all around our network. Now, those hazards are important because as vehicles move through the network, they become aware of these hazards and then they make choices based on where they want to get to in the network and what the hazard is telling them. So for example, if we've got a near side turn hazard like this, the vehicles which see that hazard will be choosing which lanes they want to get in, depending on whether they want to turn left at this junction or whether they want to keep going around the roundabout. Now, for the most part, Paramics Discovery will make good choices about the lanes that vehicles want to be in. But sometimes, and especially in complex situations like this, the choices aren't the ones which would be made on the ground, and so we need to do some additional editing to help them make the right choices. And that's where our hazard overrides comes in. Now we can turn hazard overrides on using the styles panel again, and you'll see a lot more information appear on the screen. Now there are hotkeys for hazards and hazard overrides, so using the hotkey capital H or small h turns them both on and off. Now one thing that you will notice immediately with the hazard overrides is we've got two different types of symbols. We've got the white circle with a red lightning bolt in it, and then the alternative, the red circle with the white lightning bolt in it. And those two symbols represent whether the hazard is upstream or downstream. Okay, now the one with the white label in it, the white circle with the red lightning, is what we call a downstream hazard, and it's always going to be linked with the opposite symbol, which is our upstream hazard. So when we think about downstream and upstream, we're thinking about vehicles moving from this one to this one. So the vehicles were traveling around here to this hazard override point here. Okay, so this is a new aspect to hazard overrides, actually displaying it on the screen like we're doing so here. When we select one, as you've noticed, it just highlights the one that we've selected rather than all the others, so it makes it easier to see. If I was to untoggle that and put it on again, then we can see all of our different hazard overrides. So there's a way now to see where they are in the network and to select them on the network as well. But we can also see them in more detail within the Edit Network menu and Hazard Overrides. And here's a list of all our hazard overrides within the model. Now this GUI has been improved, so it's much easier to locate your hazard overrides, also to edit the name of it, which you can do. It gives by default the name is the information in the settings, which we'll come on to in a minute, but you can rename those hazards if you wish to. And we've got our long list, and then when we select one, it gives the information about it on the left-hand side. So if I select the first hazard override here, I can see that it relates to the one that I actually selected on the network. So I've got my downstream link, which is this one, and I've got my upstream link here, which is this one. And really what we're saying here in the settings is if the lane range on the downstream link is 1-to-1, then override the lane range on the upstream link and make it 2-to-2. And the reason that we're overriding that is because naturally the vehicles who are coming along here on a 2-lane link and wanting to get into lane 1 over here, you would naturally expect them to want to be in lane 1 in advance. That's what Paramics Discovery would decide by default, because if you're getting to lane 1, the natural thing is to want to be in lane 1 on the approach. But in actual fact, we don't want that, because if we look closely at the behavior around this section of the network, we can see that vehicles going in lane 1 around here actually turn off at this junction here. Okay, so we need the vehicles to be in lane 2 as they go around, and therefore they will then get into lane 1 through this section and be in lane 1, crucially down here, in order to turn off onto this link. Now, because there's a crucial aspect of being in lane 1 here, because it's the only lane which turns off, we actually have a lot of hazard overrides relating to that link. You can see several of them relating to this link here, which is 2380 to 2340. And so if I select different options, I've got the same upstream link each time, and it's going through different, the same downstream link each time, and it's going through different upstream links, often with the same principle, which is I want the vehicles to be in lane 2 rather than lane 1 on the hazard override. Now, another new aspect to hazard overrides is the ability to export them and import them. So with lots of hazard overrides in a model like this, it can take a bit of time to go through each of them and edit them within the user interface. And so the ability to export and import is to try and speed up that process and be able to work on these outside of the model if you wish to. So if I go to Edit Network, Export, select my features from CSV, and I'll take everything off here except my hazard overrides, which I want to keep, and I'm going to export that. Now this is another new feature which I introduced a couple of videos ago, which is the ability to open the export folder whenever you export anything from Paramics Discovery. So I'm going to do that. I'll open my export folder, and I should see my hazard override appearing within that folder. I can double click on that to open the CSV, and I can see the information for the hazard override in the CSV file. And the format's quite simple. We've got our downstream link, our downstream lane range 1-to-1, our upstream link, and our upstream lane range 2-to-2. And we've got a column for the name, which we haven't renamed any of the hazard overrides in this case, but you can do that quite easily. You might also notice the double colon in here in the formatting, which is another feature which we've introduced recently into Paramics Discovery to make these CSV files really easy to open in Excel without any errors, because it doesn't see these links as time-based. Okay, so that's how you can export your file. If I was to say change a couple of the variables here and save this and close, and I'll go to Edit Network and Import, and I've got my Hazard Overrides file, and I'm going to import that. And it's telling me 52 hazard overrides have been successfully imported, and the previous 52 have therefore been deleted. So when you import hazard overrides, it will import whatever's in the file and remove what's already in the model. So it's worth bearing that in mind. It will also check the formatting of the file as you import it to make sure it's correct, and if the formatting isn't right, it won't import it for you. And we can see if I select my top hazard override here, the downstream lane range has changed from 2-to-2 to 2-to-2 from 1-to-1, and you can see that also being reflected in the user interface here with the 2-to-2 being highlighted. I'm going to change the downstream lane range back to 1-to-1, so it will behave as I would expect. So you can see that lane range again. And I'm going to save this now and go to my Visualize tab. And what I want to do really is to observe the behavior of the model with these hazard overrides in place. And I can check the lane choice that vehicles are making as they move through the network. Okay, so what I want to do is identify which vehicles are going to be going onto this link here. So if I turn on my nodes using the hotkey N and go to Visualize and Vehicle Marking, and I'm going to add a new vehicle marking rule, and I want my to link to be this link here. So sorry, not that link, this one, 2840 to 877. So 40, there we go, to 877. And my to link doesn't really matter. I'm going to be able to see all the vehicles that are coming around here anyway. Now, what this is doing is it's highlighting all the vehicles that are going to this link in a blue color. So if I continue with the simulation, I'll probably slow it down a little bit so I can see the vehicles. So you can see that everything that's going over here is highlighted in blue, and I want to check my vehicles that are coming along this link here, that they're using the correct lane to get to that exit. Okay, so I can see a few blue vehicles now appearing, and we can see that they're all in lane 2, which is excellent. If I select those vehicles and drop some information about them, it will tell me the lane range of that vehicle at that moment. So I can see the lane range is 2-to-2, which is what we've programmed within the hazard override for these links along here. And we can see that for each of these vehicles. So those vehicles are staying in lane 2. They know they need to be in lane 2 in order to then transfer as they go through here. I'll take those off just to see it more clearly. And then they move into lane 1 through here, and they turn off at this point on the network. Okay, so you can see the correct lanes are being used, and the vehicle marking is a very useful tool to help us identify that. We can also use some other tools which have been introduced recently into Paramics Discovery, which are really around vehicle awareness. And so I'll try and find another blue vehicle or a couple of blue vehicles as they approach here. And this time I want to toggle on this toolbar button, which is turning vehicle hazard lanes on or off. Okay, so I'm going to switch that on. And then when I select a vehicle, I can see the hazard lanes that that vehicle is choosing as it makes its journey through. Now, what's useful about this with the hazard overrides is when we've added a hazard override, we can see this dotted line, which is what it would have been by default, and we can see the solid line, which is what the hazard override has set it to. So we can see that the lane range is 2 to 2 here. Now, we haven't bothered to set a hazard override on this section because we know by the time they get here, because they can see the hazard, they want to be in lane 1 anyway, and we want them to be in lane 1. We could, in theory, set hazard overrides for all of these links, but we don't actually need to in practice because the vehicle will be in lane 1 anyway as it moves through. Okay, so I'll try and catch another blue vehicle, again from a little bit further back, and this time you can see it as it progresses. So as this vehicle goes through the signal, when it's at this point, it thinks it can be in lane 1 or lane 2 along this whole section, though it knows it needs to get into lane 1 over here in order to turn off. Okay, but once it goes through that signal junction, you can see again the hazard override is setting it to be lane 2 to 2, and you can see with the dotted line that by default it would have been either. So you can see how the hazard override has changed the default hazard behavior. So that's a really useful tool to be able to check that. So that's turning vehicle hazard lanes on or off. Thank you for watching this video tutorial today. There's quite a lot in there as we've looked at hazards, lane choice, and hazard overrides. And as I said at the beginning, I would encourage you to have a look on our knowledge base for articles and videos about lane choice and hazards, which will help you use this feature in Paramics Discovery. Thanks again for watching, and enjoy using Paramics Discovery version 25. Bye for now.